Today, I'm taking a look at a running GPS watch, the Garmin Forerunner 45. 8.79 miles, 9 minutes, 16 seconds per mile, 140 beats per minute today. Taking the Garmin Forerunner 45 with me for my run commute to work. And for testing purposes, I also wore the Polar Vantage V as well as a couple of sensors. We'll talk a little bit more of the head-to-head testing towards the end of the video. But first, before we talk about any of that, I do want to go over some disclosures. The Garmin Forerunner 45 is a watch that I purchased with my own money. No one sent it to me or is paying me to make the video or to wear the watch, and no one's gonna get a chance to preview any of my footage before you guys get a chance to see this and my testing results on YouTube. Now with the disclosures out of the way, let's talk about the Garmin Forerunner 45. Now this is Garmin's entry-level running GPS watch at just $200 in terms of the list price. I think you could probably get some of the previous iterations, some older models are out there like on Amazon or other shopping sites, maybe for cheaper. But as far as what Garmin currently has on its site at $200, this is, I think, the cheapest entry point for your running GPS watch. Although I do think there's like the Vivo something band, which has a lot of the same features, and I may take a look at that. That's even a little bit cheaper, but it looks like a Fitbit. So if you want something that kind of like looks like a watch, this is the cheapest one, at least that I'm aware of on the Garmin website today at the time of the filming of this video. Now what you're going to get for that $200 is a GPS radio, so you can get your position and your pace and speed data off of the GPS. You're also getting a heart rate monitor on the wrist with optical sensors on the backside, so it can track your heart rate during an activity, and also just throughout the day. It has something that can track your sleep and what your heart's doing while you're sleeping, and it gives you some data off of that. And you're also getting things like the step counter and notifications from your phone, so it can pair. You're going to get some ability to get some data from the phone, so you can see things like the upcoming weather in your area right from the watch. So you're getting a lot of functionality there for the $200. You're also going to be able to get access to the Garmin app and also Garmin Connect. So you can either look at it from your phone or from the web after the fact and keep track of all your training and kind of see all the data in one place online. And that data can then push to any of the other apps that you're using to collect or to publish your training activities like Strava or Nike Run Club if you're into that. Now, in terms of running with the watch and just living with the watch, I've actually been using this for quite a while. I'm only going to focus on two main activities today for like data purposes, but I've been wearing this watch along with the Polar Vantage V for about the last month. The bulk of my kind of like day-to-day wearability stuff happened while I was in Austin for work and to do some running while I was down there. So I've been wearing this. I've just had this on for quite a while. And it's a really great watch to live with. It's very nice and readable. You can customize the data fields that you're looking at depending on your activity. There's buttons all over the watch, which are really nice and pressable. And there's labels on the button, which I find really useful because sometimes the interface isn't always that intuitive in terms of what I should be doing next. So with the labels on the buttons, that always kind of helps me out. I like having that on the bezel right there. The buttons were nice and clickable, and even when I was wearing like my winter running gloves, I was still able to, even with my mittens, click on the buttons that I needed to, whether it's hitting a lap, pausing or resuming the activity, or saving versus not accidentally discarding or accidentally ending an activity. All those things I was able to manage with gloves on. So the buttons really nice, really enjoying it. Comparing that to the other Garmin watch that I've tested previously, which was the Vivo Active 3, that was one of those, like, it's a GPS watch that looks like a smartwatch kind of thing, and it only had one button, so that was really hard for me to live with. You had to do a lot of touching of the touch screen. This screen is not like touch sensitive, so I actually prefer that for my running watches because it just prevents me from accidentally doing something that I don't want to do. I like having a button that I have to press, especially with this screen that's this small. I just don't like having my fingers all over the screen. I just like being able to use buttons to navigate, because when I'm holding it, my fingers get out of the way and I could see the screen and navigate at the same time. To me, that just makes a lot of sense. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty of the data and my actual testing, I want to give you kind of a brief overview. If you're looking at this watch, if it's your first running watch that you're looking at and you're considering, well, do I want this or do I want to get an Apple Watch? I'm starting to get into running a little bit more and I want to have something more than just my phone to help me on my runs. I think this is a great entry-level watch to run with. And even beyond just being entry-level, I think it's a pretty great watch. I really enjoy running with Garmin. I think their GPS sensors are pretty good. I get a location lockdown pretty quickly. The screen is easy to use while I'm running. And from general livability perspective, I really like it. It usually stays pretty well connected to my phone, so I'm getting that weather data and I'm getting those notifications. I can't like respond or interact with anything that's on my phone, but I can at least see as I'm running or going throughout my day, if something buzzes, I can tell if it's something that, okay, I can just kind of like be aware of that information and live on with my day, or I can stop and kind of like get my phone out because that's something that I have to do something about. So in terms of overall livability, it's great. It's a lightweight watch. I hardly know it's there, and I've really been enjoying it. And I think it's a really great value at $200 or just under $200. Now let's get into some of the testing. The testing that I'm going to talk to you guys about today is the past 2 Mondays of running for me. One is some of the footage that you just saw, and I did also the previous Monday as well. And the way that I set up the testing, and the reason why I was really interested in this watch, is because I've been running with a foot pod and I've been running with an external heart rate monitor. And so I'm thinking, so if I'm using the Stride foot pod for that pace and distance information, GPS to me isn't really all that important. It's nice to have, and I like to have the tracing, but as someone that runs in a city, like I don't really feel all that confident some of the time to use GPS. And if you've run the Chicago Marathon or any other races in an urban area, you understand how using GPS for pace and distance information can be a little bit of a stressful situation, let's put it that way, when you're running that race. So I've been using the foot pod for that. And I'm using the external heart rate monitor because I felt like while I'm running, when levels of exertion start to get really high, that's when the optical heart rate sensor on any watch that I've used before just doesn't seem to be all that accurate. And so I've been using an external heart rate monitor. So if I'm kind of taking out or unpacking some of the features from these watches that are a little bit more expensive, then do I still need a little bit more expensive of a watch? Can I get away with the entry-level watch? So that's what the whole point of this testing was really about. And so here's how I did it. So on the first run, I turned off GPS. So I did a treadmill run on the Garmin Forerunner 45, and I paired it to my Stride foot pod and my Polar OH1, my favorite foot pod and my favorite external heart rate monitor, to check out what the data was. And I ran the Polar Vantage V. I thought that I had run it without any sensors at all, but I think it ended up remembering that it was connected to the heart rate monitor. So I don't have any differences in heart rate monitor from that day that I can show you, but I can show you the differences in terms of the distance that it tracked. And for that run, I ended up with 17.49 kilometers on the Garmin, which had its GPS off. So really that's coming from the foot pod. And then I had 17.57 kilometers with the Polar, which was using GPS. And so I felt like those numbers were much closer than I was expecting, just 0.08 kilometers off. That's an incredibly small amount of variance over the distance that I ran. So overall, I was really surprised by the performance of the Polar's GPS, but also this serves as proof that even though the Stride footpod isn't technically supported or listed as supported on the Stride website, you can connect the Stride footpod to your Garmin Forerunner 45 and at least get pace and distance information during an activity. Now the drawback is you're not getting power. I couldn't figure out a way to configure a power field on the Garmin Forerunner 45, and I don't think it's even recording the power. So I'm looking at the data. I've run it through DC Rainmaker's analyzer tool, and the data just isn't there. It is recording or connecting to certain aspects of the Stride FootPod, but it's just not recording and keeping any of that power data. So I definitely can't see it at all after the run, in addition to the fact that I'm pretty sure I can't see it during the run. So you can use it. The Stride FootPod's pretty expensive, and you're gonna lose a lot of the main functionality of the FootPod that's that expensive. But if you're looking for something that gets you pace and distance information, and maybe you already have the Stride FootPod, it can work here, and it can give you those two basic, although really important, those are the two most important metrics to me, data from that Stride FootPod. In terms of the heart rate monitor, it was able to connect to it and see it just fine, and I felt like the readings were really accurate, and I thought things were going just fine in that regard. So you can definitely pair it with an external heart rate monitor. So for this run, on this particular run today, the footage that you saw, the stats that I just reported to you, that's all coming straight from the Garmin itself. So the GPS is coming from the Garmin, the pace, the distance data, and the heart rate is coming from the Garmin itself. On this particular day, I also ran with the Polar Vantage V, and I have it set up how I kind of normally have it set up, where I've paired it to my Stride FootPod, which can give me power, pace, and distance, as well as a host of other running metrics. And I had it paired to my Polar OH1, which is currently my favorite external heart rate monitor. And if we take a look at that first, if we look at the distance data, we had 14.14 kilometers for the Garmin and 14.09 kilometers for the Polar with the Stride FootPod. Now, just to make sure that I was getting the pace and distance information from the Polar and the Stride FootPod specifically, I did this as a treadmill run, and so there wasn't any GPS tracing available from the Polar, and the pace and distance information is coming straight from the FootPod itself. And so for that to be only 0.05 kilometers off, I think is pretty amazing, just 50 meters off, which kind of feels like a lot, but in the overall scheme of things, I think is really remarkably accurate. So feeling really good about the data that's coming from that. And so definitely for someone that's getting into and looking for an entry-level watch, I think that the results are pretty phenomenal. And so definitely something that I'd feel comfortable basing my training on, at least for the kind of use case and the user that the $200 price point is trying to target. And if you look at into the heart rate, if we look at the tracings, what you'll see is pretty much what I would expect comparing any wrist optical heart rate sensor from any running watch, whether it's Apple Watch, Polar, Garmin. What happens to me during a run is for a lot of the run, it's fine. And then towards the end, when I'm starting to get a little bit tired at just like a certain point, the watch kind of like gives out and it over reports what my actual heart rate is compared to, say, an external monitor. And you could see that on the graph there. Towards the last portion of that run, things are starting to get a little bit crazy, where my heart rate is, at least by the external heart rate monitor, staying at that constant level, or I'm able to keep it at that constant level, but the watch is saying that it's way higher than usual. So again, if you're really starting to get serious about heart rate training, that's something that you're really looking at, then you definitely want to go with an external heart rate monitor. But if you're just looking at it mainly for like sleep tracking, then I do think that the wrist-based optical heart rate monitor is pretty good. I'm not the most discerning person in terms of kind of like the day-to-day heart rate stuff. I don't really need to know my resting heart rate, that kind of thing. And so for me and my purposes, it seemed pretty good, pretty reliable, or reliable enough. Now, the only thing about Garmin that I thought was a little bit difficult and weird was in terms of heart rate. I'm training by heart rate currently right now. So what I wanted to be able to do was to be able to set and lock the zone that I was running in. So that way, if I was running and my heart rate was too high, it would let me know, or if my heart rate was too low, it would let me know. And I had a real hard time doing that. Basically, the best way that I could figure out how to do it was to set it up before the run, and I couldn't figure out a way to change it in the middle of the run, or I was too scared to try and do that. I was worried that I might accidentally like terminate the activity. So some of my runs, I'm running at a certain heart rate for part of it and then running at a different heart rate for another part of it. So like the heart rate alarms, I don't want for the entire run necessarily. I couldn't figure out a way to turn them on and off in the middle of the run. For me, as far as I could tell, it's something you have to set in the beginning or not. I didn't like that. And then I also couldn't like customize my heart rate zones. And so it basically, you tell it like what you think your max heart rate is, and then it fills in all the other zones for you. And so I didn't really like that. I couldn't like tweak those numbers a little bit. So that was a little bit frustrating. But I think that and the lack of the power functionality from the external footpod were the two only real drawbacks that I experienced with this watch. Other than that, it gave me a lot of the other features that I need as a road runner that runs mainly in cities. Now, the other things that you're not getting with this, that you're getting with something like the Polar Vantage V, are things like the barometer, so you can get more accurate altitude data, and there's a lot of other features that are there that do, I think, make some of the more expensive watches more worthwhile. But in terms of this price point, it's a really compelling option, and I think it's going to work for a lot of people out there, especially if this is your first foray into GPS running watches. So if you have any other questions about my testing or the Garmin or the Polar, feel free to leave them in the comments. I'd love to talk to you guys about it a little bit more down there. Let's keep it civil though. Let's keep in mind, I'm not a GPS engineer and I'm not a data scientist. I'm not a heart rate technician. I'm not a medical professional. So like, I'm looking at this from a runner's perspective. I'm also not a coach. I don't coach anybody. And I'm not currently coached by anybody. So like, let's keep that in perspective. Let's be nice. That being said, before I go, I do want to talk about the charity runner for this week. This week, it's John Henry, who's going to be running the London Marathon and raising money for the New York Road Runners Team for Kids. I was happy to donate $70 of my money to his fundraising efforts, and I'll post a link in the description in case you'd like to learn more. I also want to talk about last week's charity runner for the week. Last week, it was Brad Lamb, who's raising money for the National Multiple Sclerosis Society. It's such a hard word for me to say. And he's doing it by running the Boston Marathon coming up. And I wanted to talk about how he did last week. Now, his page was a little bit difficult because a lot of the pages list the donations in chronological order, so I can kind of see like which ones came when and talk to you guys about, and that's how I know like who donated from here going over there. His is listed in like numerical value, like who donated the most, so it's a little bit different. So I asked you guys to put like a little something in there to let me know that we're all part of the Kofuzi Run Club here on that donation page. And let me give you some of the data. I think based on like the first day that he was announced, and he'd been raising money for a little while, and the last day or today, looking at his fundraising numbers, I think that together we have raised a total of $614 for that fundraising effort. And I think that's just absolutely mind-boggling. I'm so overwhelmed and impressed. And let me take a second just to recognize the people who were part of that fundraising effort. So first we had someone who's been donating under Kofuzi Run Club every single week with a $71 amount, donated again to Brad's fundraiser last week. That's so amazing. And then I think we have to scroll down a little bit further, and then we'll get to JC Gill, a Kofuzi subscriber, with $25. We've got KP from Kofuzi Run Club with $20. We've got Peter Y, hashtag Team Kofuzi. Ben Tarode, another familiar name, $11, hashtag Kofuzi. Jeff Anderson with $10. RC Iggy with 10, Nina Gu with 10, Stephen DeGalen, another name that I recognize, with $10. Michael Mansfield, that is a name that I think I recognize, but there isn't like a specific annotation for Team Kofuzi or Kofuzi Run Club, but I think Michael's been donating. Sam's running again with $10. Good to see you in there again. Mallory, hashtag Team Kofuzi with 10, and Michael Sessler with 10, and Marielle with the hashtag Kofuzi with $5. I think there's got to be some more of you in there to get us to that $614 amount. I'm sorry if I overlooked your name. My apologies for that. I tried to do my best to kind of figure out like how that would work. But I think that based on the first day and today, we've got a total of $614, and that's just absolutely amazing and more proof of what we can do when we run together as a pack. That's all I have for today, everybody. Thanks so much for making it all the way to the end of the video, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Yo, what's going on?